don't think so.
Yeah, he did it.
This episode of Suspenders of Belief is brought to you by Body Augmentation by Kano. Mention this ad to get a break on your first cyborg guy.
Hey guys, I'm Heavy.
Hey, I'm Travey.
And today we watched Mortal Kombat.
What's Mortal Kombat about?
I should be very specific. We watched the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie, and in case you've never heard of Mortal Kombat, it's a fantasy martial arts film based on the original 1992 game. Essentially, we have three main characters, Liu Kang, Sonya Blade, and Johnny Cage. They are responsible for preventing the 10th and final defeat from Outworld to save Earth from being taken over.
It's pretty straightforward. You know, you got your good guys, they go to a place, they have to fight some bad guys, and hopefully win.
And a lot of times when you have an adaptation, like the first Resident Evil movie is a good example, where they had to take the general idea of a zombie outbreak and do their own unique story with like small touches and references to the video games. For the most part, this is just Mortal Kombat, the first game, in movie form.
It's not always easy to adapt a video game because oftentimes story falls secondary to game design. Like Super Mario Brothers we spoke of last time, where it was like, it's just a kind of a wacky setting for platforming. The story isn't as important as the gameplay itself. And with Mortal Kombat, the story is also not as important, but it's simple. It gives you just enough of a guideline to play the tournament fighting game, and you can interpret that into a movie relatively easily, especially this one, which largely lifts itself from Enter the Dragon. But that's kind of a snake eating itself, because Mortal Kombat, when it was designed, was kind of emulating that old Bruce Lee movie as well. So it's interesting how it's come back around to kind of remake that movie, because the game kind of remade that movie.
I will say, just jumping right on into it, the cinematography is one of the things about this film that I absolutely love. I loved how many sweeping, craning, dolly, long shots, characters walking in from one side of the frame, exiting to the other side, to the camera panning around. There were so many great cinematic shots in this film. This movie was made on an $18 million budget, ended up grossing $122 million. They didn't have the biggest budget when they made this film, but there was a lot of stylistic effort with things like the lighting and the camera work and the costume design, Goro special effects. There are a lot of creative elements to talk about in this film.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I feel like they did the best they could with the budget they had. There's some things that don't hold up well, but it's like they didn't have a Jurassic Park budget to do that level of CG or anything. So a lot of it was like, well, the set isn't much, but we can dress it a certain way, we can light it a certain way, we can shoot it a certain way to make it seem more expensive or more interesting than it actually is. One of my favorite crane shots is when Liu Kang arrives at the Temple of Light. The boat pulls up and the camera follows Liu Kang as he hops off the boat and goes up off the steps, and then there's a slow pan behind him as he climbs the steps, and you see, boom, this big temple. The visual element of this movie really holds up pretty well, apart from like some of the bad composite effects and things like that.
They are definitely the eyesore of the film, because everything that's practical, even Goro, when he's a little clunky and a little too slow, you could tell that the person in the lower part of the suit is deliberately moving his arms at a slower pace to match what the animatronic robotic arms are capable of doing.
Yeah.
The CG doesn't hold up. Reptile in particular, it's so bad it almost makes you wonder, like, why did they just cut him? Technology's not there. We can't do Reptile. Just remove him. He's not even in the first game. It doesn't matter.
I presume they spent all their money on the Goro puppet, because they could have easily done like a Gremlin-style puppet for Reptile and close-up shots or something, and it would have been okay. Maybe a couple of select CG shots from when he's moving. Like when he's turning invisible, it's fine. We understand visual distortion like that to apply. Something's invisible. Like it doesn't have to look that great for you to get it.
One other effect that I kept noticing was the face morphs. They use it in a fight sequence with Reptile where it's like a statue and then it morphs into the actor's face. Shang Tsung, when he's morphing into different people.
It's kind of the thing when you watch like a more poorly made movie than this, where you're like, guys, all you had to do was cut right there and it would have been just as effective. Or all you had to do was show the monster from this part up and it would have been as effective. Why did you show the whole thing? You know, it's choices that are made regardless of budget. I'm not going to say every shot is perfect and there's no mistakes, but it's like there's enough going on where you can see, oh, somebody cared about this to try to do a really good job with it. And you respond to that watching it, because you can see, even if the quality isn't there per se, you can see the effort, the earnesty of it. I like that.
At one point in the film, there is this skull with the snake crawling out up in the sky, and I was like, that's the Death Eater symbol.
Yeah, they sailed their boat right into the wizarding world.
This is, at its core, a martial arts film. And that's one thing that if this movie had not done the martial arts successfully, I think that no matter how much people wanted to see Mortal Kombat as a movie, if the martial arts were lame or just laughably terrible, I don't think it would have held up very well. But upon rewatching it with the eyes of an adult now, not just a child looking at it, but some of the fight choreography is just fantastic. It really, really has a lot of great fake punches and whatnot. And I think they highlight it particularly well in Johnny Cage's introduction scene, where it seems like, oh, it's just a cheesy action fight. But if you notice, the stunt choreography is a little clumsier. It's not quite as tight, and it doesn't look as fluid as some of the fighting later. So I feel like that's a deliberate choice there, where the person, he's being punched in the face and he just kind of does this, as opposed to some of the other fights later in the film, or even before that with Liu Kang's nightmare sequence, where when somebody gets hit and they kind of have this like stunned, disoriented sort of head bobble, which is a more naturalistic thing to happen when somebody gets kicked in the face.
It was good to have that contrast, so that way you had like, this is what we could be doing, but we're doing a little bit more. At least with most of the fight sequences. Some of them aren't so great, like the Sonya and Kano one is a little lacking, and some of the other ones are just a little bit lazier. But, you know, sometimes it's a matter of the talent you have, the actors who aren't trained to fight that much. You can tell Kano and Sonya, those actors were cast for their performances. And maybe that's why that scene came so early. They wanted to get it over with. I don't know. It would have definitely felt weird to go from like the reptile fight to the Sonya and Kano fight after the intense reptile one, to follow it up with just kind of a casual one, and she breaks his neck and that's it. So maybe that's why it was put in earlier in the movie, when most of the fights were a little more grounded and a little more slower paced, I guess.
She's so blindly driven to chase Kano to the literal ends of the earth that she doesn't even question all the crazy shenanigans going on around her. She's in this other world. There's all this crazy mystical elements. Like, she doesn't bat an eye at it. She doesn't care. She's just like, where's Kano? That's all she cares about. And so for that to be her central driving point, her payoff is the 45-minute mark. Like the middle of the film, she gets that confrontation with Kano. And while we were watching it, I was just thinking, it's fine for her to maybe start like, oh, we're going to get it. We're going to get that confrontation. I just wish that it hadn't just ended right there, because it's so abrupt. And after that's resolved, it's almost like they have to look for an excuse for her to still be in the movie.
Well, the bit when Raiden is like pinpointing everybody's arc close to the end of the second act, he specifically points out Sonya and says that, hey, you need to learn to accept help. Her arc is she wants to get Kano. The middle of the movie, she gets Kano. That's it. But then Raiden's like, no, you got to accept help. But it's like, she does have to accept help in the third act, but only because she's kidnapped. It's not like she had a real choice in the matter or anything like that. I suppose you could argue that like when Shang Tsung challenges her at the end, he could be arrogant and say, I will fight you, Shang Tsung. But since she accepts the help of Liu Kang doing it, maybe that's what it's supposed to be.
I think we were supposed to interpret that because she was so adamant that my friends will come to save me. Because if she had really genuinely thought that she had no other choice, like, well, if I'm going to get out of here, I've got to fight this guy, or no one else is going to save me, I'm going to save myself. If she had been that same arrogant person she was in the beginning of the film, then of course she would have accepted the fight. But because she was like, no, my friends are coming, I don't have to fight you, I'm not going to listen to you, like, because she was relying on the friends that she had made. So she does have a nice little arc.
Something to it, yeah.
It's dumb that she gets kidnapped, and the fact that she's been this tough kick-butt character and she gets grabbed by the arm and like, let me go.
Right, yeah. You got me by the ponytail.
No! Let me go! He's a sorceress. Couldn't he have just trapped her in like a portal or something, and then Sonya's just gone? And like, what'd you do with her? Well, come and find out. Ha ha ha. And then he runs through a portal, and then they had to chase after him. They didn't have to do the dumb pulling her by the hair bit. That was contrived.
It's funny because she's like one of the most efficient characters, because earlier in the movie they established that she's looking for Kano and everybody's following her, and she's like, leave me alone, I got this, I'm fine. So they're trying to set that up. But I wish that they had landed it maybe with a bit of dialogue or something at the end and being like, oh, I finally am accepting your help, Liu Kang, thank you, or something. But they don't quite have enough time for that. You're mostly tied up in the Liu Kang story, as well as Johnny Cage making quips, so they didn't really have a whole lot. She could have just used more dialogue and it probably would have landed a little better.
The thing about the culmination of these different characters and their different story arcs, because you have Liu Kang, who's motivated by revenge of his little brother being killed. You have Sonya Blade, who's chasing after Kano. You have Johnny Cage, who probably has the weakest element of motivation of why he's there, because it's just his ego at stake. Apparently he's being torn apart by the media that they claim that he's not a real martial artist. It's all fake. It's all Hollywood magic. He can't really fight.
Right.
But he genuinely does care about the martial arts, and it does get under his skin that he's not respected as a real martial artist. So that is ultimately how Shang Tsung is able to manipulate manipulate Johnny Cage into getting into the tournament. But as we're watching it, not until pretty far into the film are we ever given any kind of reasoning for why these specific people were chosen.
Yeah.
And Shang Tsung specifically makes a line about how you have been chosen, you've been selected to participate in Mortal Kombat. But why?
Yeah, and by whom?
Did he choose it? Did fate choose it? The Sorting Hat picked out names? And that would be fine, but the problem is it's not even like it's just these 3 humans and then that's it, and then the rest of them are from the other dimension, because you see a montage sequence where Goro is just brutally murdering people. Presumably there are other people who came with them, but there's a dozen of them. Like, he just, person after person after person are falling on these rocks, and we don't even give a name for most of those characters until the one fight in the boxing arena.
With fake Dave Chappelle.
Where we have this character who, the only person we've even seen have any kind of interaction with was Johnny Cage, who was like, hey, I saw you in that fight once. You were pretty good. And that's it. That's all we're given.
Yeah.
When we see him lose, ironically, the first person who reacts is Sonya. We had just seen this montage of like 12 other people dying. I'm like, nobody cared about any of them.
My only friend that I've known for 5 minutes. Yeah, it's terrible. Johnny reacts to it right before the scene ends. I was reading in the trivia that apparently there was a scene where they had like a funeral for him and it was cut out, which honestly is fine because they didn't take time for funerals for anybody else.
If you're going to give a minor character a big dramatic death like that, we needed to care about him. And as an audience member, I didn't even know the character's name. I didn't even catch it.
Yeah.
Some of the other characters that are interesting, though, you have Scorpion and Sub-Zero, who are arguably the most famous characters of Mortal Kombat.
Most iconic, maybe.
Yeah, even if you've never watched Mortal Kombat, if you saw a picture of Scorpion or Sub-Zero, you'd probably know their names just because of how big the branding of those two characters are. And in this movie, it's like, this is Scorpion and Sub-Zero. They're slaves under my power. And that's it. That's all we're given. Like, sometimes they're brothers, sometimes they're rivals, sometimes they're et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's different universe explanations, but in this movie, nah, they're just slaves.
It's almost like for time, they wanted them in the movie, but they didn't want to dive into that lore this time because they were just like, dude, we have so much we're trying to juggle. And I do give the movie a lot of credit for the economy of the dialogue and the editing. They just try to get boom to the point. Like when Sonya and Jax show up at that party, it's all like, we're looking for Kano, we're going to catch him, and blah, blah, blah. That's what we're here for. It's awkwardly delivered,
Sure.
But it's like, it's very efficient. Like, this is what we're doing. This is the whole point of my character, blah, blah, blah. And we move on. So I give them a lot of credit for like knowing when to make cuts for the most part.
One thing I was going to say that was funny about the specific wording that they're slaves is there's a scene between Kano and Goro where they're at a dinner table and Kano is being a slob and there's like eating with his fingers, and Goro is not impressed by Kano whatsoever. He like throws a drink on his lap. But what's interesting is the way that Goro phrases,
Shang Tsung is a great sorcerer. The wise cultivate his favor. Those who challenge his power become his slaves.
which made me wonder, did Scorpion and Sub-Zero at some point oppose Shang Tsung, and that's why he took them as slaves?
Maybe.
It was the specific wording that Goro said that made me think that, because I never had that thought before, that made me question, like, I wonder if they were trying to establish that there was some kind of backstory with these characters.
Yeah.
It's funny that Scorpion and Sub-Zero are such big characters that this movie tells us nothing about.
From what little lore I know, they are from Earth, so I guess it would make sense that they would oppose him, at least at some point, in their loyalty to their home planet or whatever.
Another character who I feel kind of gets shafted is Raiden of all people. And it's interesting because both in the Earth realm and in the outer world, characters seem to know who he is. Whenever he's at the temple with Liu Kang, the monks all immediately bow to him and recognize him as Lord Raiden. And then when there's that fight sequence where they're all outnumbered in Outworld, Raiden just raises a finger and all of the Outworld people back up and leave him alone. So it seems pretty clear that Raiden is known in both realms, which made me wonder, aren't there rules about where he can travel and when? Like, how did they even know who he is? Should Raiden have, like, electrocuted one of them so they would know to back off? Like, it just kind of made me wonder.
I would presume that Raiden has been part of facilitating the Mortal Kombats on the Earth side for the previous 9 battles, so maybe they just know him from that. Maybe he's recruiting people from the Temple of Light for the past, like, because it's like every 30 years, every generation. So presumably Liu Kang was either a child or not born when the last tournament happened, so he has no memory of it. But the other monks were like, the last time we had a Mortal Kombat. This one dude, Raiden, showed up and he kicked some ass and he picked one of our dudes to go fight. He lost, but we respect Raiden because he can electrocute us. So maybe that's why monks know about him. And in Outworld, they were like, oh yeah, that Raiden dude, something happened before where one of our dudes challenged their dudes and he killed him or something. They could have established that a little bit better. But again, economy. It's just like, boom, boom, he pulls up the little lightning bolt, they back away. That's all you need to know, or at least in terms of understanding from a story beat, where it's like, oh, they know not to mess with him. That's it. You don't understand why, and they don't have enough time to dive into that. But it's enough to convey what they need to convey very quickly and then move on. That's the whole point of this movie. Just get it over with and move on to the next thing.
Well, you've also got my favorite character. This is Princess Katana. She has my back.
She doesn't really get a whole lot of explanation until the third act when they show up in Outworld. She's all like, oh yeah, my dad originally ran this planet until Shao Kahn, the emperor, showed up and took over and kept me as his adoptive daughter, which is a little weird. So that explains why she would be at least sympathetic to the Earthlings' cause to protect their planet, because she might identify with them a little bit. But also, if they can potentially defeat Shang Tsung and the emperor, maybe her planet could go back to normal and she could rule her own planet. Initially, it was all like, why is she even here? Who is this person? So I guess they kind of explain that, but she doesn't really have much to do. There's this whole lovely scene where she has to fight Liu Kang because reasons, and they have expository dialogue, and Shang Tsung is like clearly upset by that. He's all like, hey, quit telling him plot. She just keeps doing it, and it's like, well, if he has this much power, why would he allow this match to happen? So obviously there's some level of Mortal Kombat like rules and specifics that he can't interfere with. Then that scene just ends with Sonya fighting Liu Kang, and there's no explanation. Well, if one of them lost, doesn't one of them have to die? It ends with Liu Kang like having her pinned, kind of. Right. But then they just cut, and it's like, well, what happened after that? Like, did she lose her soul? No, obviously not, because she should have later. So it's just, I don't know if something was lost in editing.
The last fight that we saw where Liu Kang won, Shang Tsung immediately went over and stole the dude's soul, and the guy wasn't dead. I guess maybe he was dying, but he just takes the soul. So when that fight sequence happens where Liu Kang is now the clear victor, shouldn't he have immediately stole her soul?
I always interpreted it as like an exhibition match because there's no death at the end of it. But if that's the case, you would think that Shang Tsung could shut it down and just be like, hey, we're not doing exhibition matches this time or something.
Because my other thought while we're watching it was like, well, maybe it's because she's a princess, so maybe royalty during these fights has some kind of like leeway. But then Goro's also a prince, and he gets killed, so that's thrown out the window. The fight sequence basically is just there for exposition purposes, so Katana can tell Liu Kang how to defeat Sub-Zero. Even though we could just assume that Liu Kang would be like, oh crap, how am I going to stop this? Oh, a bucket, and just, just desperation. Do we really need somebody else to tell him to throw the bucket?
They build that shit up so well. They could have cut all that out, because not only do you have the exhibition match where she tells him you have to use the element of light to fight Sub-Zero or whatever, or win your next match. Then they show Raiden showing up, like very subtle. He's in like his little hood, and he's like leaving a little bucket of water. He sips from the water. He looks around all shady like, and he leaves the bucket of water there. And then Katana shows up in the middle of the fight, standing there, and you hear ADR, use the water of life to defeat your next opponent. We could have cut all three of that out, and Liu Kang's like, oh, look, a bucket. Chunk. Done. Like, it would have been fine. That's the one to say the economy of it wasn't very good. I don't know why. I feel like they thought they were being clever. Like, oh, we got to have this twist where he's going to use this bucket to defeat Sub-Zero. It's going to be awesome. It's like, well, we can't have that out of nowhere. We got to build it up. You don't have to build it up 3 times. It's like, we got to show where the water came from. We got to show where the bucket came from. We got to show where the concept of water being the element of life came from, because I've never heard of that. We got to do all this lore for this one gag, and a lot of other things in the movie are just boom, real quick, moving on. So that's an interesting inconsistency in it compared to some of the other things.
Well, a lot of the lore with the film Mortal Kombat, you kind of have to assume or just kind of take leaps of faith or just kind of come up with your own explanations for reasons for things. For instance, in that sequence where Raiden is explaining your biggest fear, what's holding you back, he specifically says to Liu Kang that it's your fear, you're afraid of your own destiny. And a lot of these characters didn't have a lot of control over their own agency because of the plot was kind of pushing them along. Shang Tsung was basically manipulating them from behind the curtain to get them to this point. But Liu Kang was the only character from the human side who was totally aware of Mortal Kombat, knew exactly what was at stake, and had been raised to understand all of this, but had intentionally walked away from it and didn't want to be a part of it, despite the fact that he's like the chosen one to save everybody.
The Elder says early in the movie,
Liu Kang has been given the dream. He is the chosen one.
No,
And Liu Kang's like, look, dude, I was drinking your Kool-Aid when I was a kid. I don't agree with this now. I know my brother was following along as part of his arc too. Is the opening shot of the movie is his brother getting murdered by Shang Tsung. Apparently, Liu Kang used to live at this temple and he drank the Kool-Aid, and his brother followed suit. And his brother challenged Shang Tsung for some reason, I guess in a fight outside of Mortal Kombat, and was killed. And Liu Kang feels responsible for that because he felt like his brother was emulating him. He encouraged him, I guess, at some point to be a part of that world. And after his death, he's feeling guilty about it.
And what's funny about that, too, the whole Shang Tsung killed Liu Kang's brother, I understand that it is the central motivation to driving Liu Kang, to making him feel guilty about his brother's death. Like, that's entirely how Liu Kang gets swept up in it. But they also established in the movie that you can't fight outside of Mortal Kombat. So Shang Tsung deliberately broke the rules just to get Liu Kang involved.
Well, I got the impression that rule was like while you're on the island, like while you're in this perimeter of area where we hold the tournament, you're not supposed to fight unless it's for Mortal Kombat, not just no fighting ever.
Well, the conclusion with Liu Kang's story arc is very much tied into like that's how he's finally able to defeat Shang Tsung is by accepting and relieving himself of that guilt of losing his younger brother. The fact that he accepts his responsibility and accepts his destiny, accepts his fate, that he is the only person who can stop Shang Tsung. Obviously, you know, Mortal Kombat, there's not one game, there's sequels to it. So I guess in the back of your head while you're watching this as an audience member, you're supposed to be like, yay, happy ending. Though we can't have a happy ending. And then boom, right in the middle of the happy ending, you get a smashed credit teaser sequence.
The whole ending is great because it's very efficient. You have Liu Kang defeats Shang Tsung, throws him in the pit, he lands on the spikes, he dies, the souls come out, he has a reconciliation with his brother moves on to the other side, everything goes back to normal, Liu Kang standing triumphantly on top of the platform, and all the other peripheral characters show up and look at him, he's all like, let's go home. Smash cut to them being at home. It's like, I love how economic that is. And then they have the little moment, Raiden's like, what took you so long? And then as they're like walking into the sunset, almost literally, Shao Kahn, the Emperor, bursts in, he's like, I'm gonna kill you all. Then they pose, music kicks in, that wonderful music, and then credits, and it's just, it's great. It's great. It's so stupid, but I love it so much and how cheesy it is.
And I mentioned it before, but this movie was hugely successful, both with fans of the video games, with critics, general audiences. Like, it made a ton of money. So much so that it actually went on to make a sequel, some spin-offs, there's animated films. 2021 just recently had a remake of the Mortal Kombat, so like this franchise is still very much alive. But this was the movie that kind of started it all. And we had a lot of nostalgia for it. We were younger when this movie came out, but we had seen it many, many times in our childhood, so it was just kind of fun to revisit. And there are things about it that haven't aged particularly well. I think some of the gender roles, especially signed with Sonya, and how Johnny Cage treats her, where it's like, well, we're men, and we're gonna stand up for the lady, you know, and she's just like, God, rolling her eyes at him. So it's like, I like that she's at least the present day 90s woman of like, I don't need no man, I'm independent, I can take care of myself. So I like that, despite how Johnny Cage is like stereotypically like a 50s gentleman, I'm gonna take care of the lady can't do her own fighting. There are pros in the film, there are cons to it. I had a lot of fun watching it though.
Yeah, it's still a blast. Like trying to remove yourself from the nostalgia of it and be objective. You can see a lot of problems, you can pick it apart, but it's so well done, and most of the action sequences are pretty great. The music is pretty great. Visually, it's really great. It's the script is a problem, but it's fine. Like it moves so quickly, and it's like 100 minutes or something. It's just so brisk and entertaining emotionally throughout. You're never bored. You're never checking your watch like, Jesus, what's the runtime on this? Is it over with yet? Never happens with this one. So it's definitely a recommend.
What would you pay for this movie?
I don't know that I would do like a full price 4K of it necessarily. I feel like in the back of my mind, I want to reserve that for like the best of the best, like absolute favorite movies. I love this movie. So like, yeah, I'd spend $25 on a Blu-ray. Fortunately, I don't have to because it's like a $7 or $5 Blu-ray most of the time. Nobody cares. I don't currently own a copy of it, but yeah, if I found it, I'd buy it in a heartbeat.
Ironically, I think that DVD might be the best format to watch this movie on, because I think the higher quality you do watch it, the more the cracks are going to show.
Yeah, on the effects and everything. Yeah, that's true.
So this was a lot of fun. I like the nostalgia trip, but we should probably watch something a little bit more recent. What sounds good?
Well, this basically got my Mortal Kombat itch just to itch and scratch it. I want some more Mortal Kombat to scratch that itch. So I want to talk about the 2021 one. I think that was a good time. I watched it once a few months back, and I'm eager to get into it and review it.
Okay, I've never seen the 2021 one, so that'll be fun to watch after watching this one.
Yeah, especially directly after to compare and contrast.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us on Suspenders of Belief. I hope you enjoyed it. Check us out next time when we watch Mortal Kombat 2021.
Yeah, bye.